Where then lies the difference, or by what term will you discriminate the fertility and copiousness of speech in those whom I have named, from the barrenness of those who use not this variety and elegance of phrase? One thing there will certainly be, which those who speak well will exhibit as their own, a graceful and elegant style, distinguished by a peculiar artifice and polish. But this kind of diction, if there be not matter beneath it clear and intelligible to the speaker, must either amount to nothing or be received with ridicule by all who hear it. For what savours so much of madness is the empty sound of words, even the choicest and most elegant, when there is no sense of knowledge contained in them. Whatever be the subject of a speech, therefore, in whatever art or branch of science, the orator, if he has made himself master of it as of the client's cause, will speak on it better and more elegantly than even the very originator and author of it can. If indeed anyone shall say that there are certain trains of thought and reasoning properly belonging to orators, and a knowledge of certain things circumscribed within the limits of the forum, I will confess that our common speech is employed about these matters chiefly, but yet there are many things in these very topics which these masters of rhetoric, as they are called, neither teach nor understand. For who is ignorant that the highest power of an orator consists in exciting the minds of men to anger, or to hatred, or to grief, or in recalling them from those more violent emotions to gentleness and compassion, which power will never be able to effect its object by eloquence, unless in him who has obtained a thorough insight into the nature of mankind and all the passions of humanity, and those causes by which our minds are either impelled or restrained. But all those are thought to belong to the philosophers, nor will the orator, at least with my consent, ever deny that such is the case. But when he has conceded to them the knowledge of things, since they are willing to exhaust their labours on that alone, he will assume to himself the treatment of oratory, which without that knowledge is nothing. For the proper concern of an orator, as I have already often said, is language of power and elegance accommodated to the feelings and understandings of mankind. On these matters I confess that Aristotle and Theophrastus have written, but consider, Scaevola, whether this is not wholly in my favour, for I do not borrow from them what the orator possesses in common with them, but they allow that which they say on these subjects belongs to oratory. Their other treatises, accordingly, they distinguish by the name of the science on which each is written. Their treatises on oratory they entitle and designate as books of rhetoric. For when, in their discussions, as often happens, such topics present themselves as require them to speak of the immortal gods, of piety, of concord, of friendship, of the common rights of their fellow citizen, or those of all mankind, of the law of nations, of equity, of temperance, of greatness of mind, of every kind of virtue, all the academies and schools of philosophy, I imagine, will cry out that all these subjects are their property, and that no particle of them belongs to the orator. But when I have given them liberty to reason on all these subjects and corners to amuse their leisure, I shall give and assign to the orator his part, which is to set forth with full power and attraction the very same topics which they discuss in such tame and bloodless phraseology. These points I then discussed with the philosophers in person at Athens, for Marcus Marcellus, our countryman, who is now curule idle, obliged me to do so, and he would certainly have taken part in our present conversation were he not now celebrating the public games, for he was then a youth marvellously given to these studies. Of the institutions of laws, of war, of peace, of alliances, of tributes, of the civil laws relating to various ranks and ages respectively, let the Greeks say, if they will, that Lycurgus or Solon, although I think these should be enrolled in the number of the eloquent, had more knowledge than Hyperides or Demosthenes, men of the highest accomplishments and refinement in oratory. Or let our countrymen prefer in this sort of knowledge that the Decemviri who wrote the 12 tables, and who must have been wise men to Servius Galba and your father-in-law Laelius, who are allowed to have excelled in the glorious art of speaking. I, indeed, shall never deny that there are some sciences peculiarly well understood by those who have applied their whole study to the knowledge and consideration of them. But the accomplished and complete orator, I shall call him who can speak on all subjects with variety and copiousness. For often in those causes which all acknowledge properly to belong to orators, there is something to be drawn forth and adopted, not from the routine of the forum, which is the only knowledge that you grant to the orator, but from some of the more obscure sciences. I ask whether a speech can be made for or against the general without an acquaintance with military affairs, or often without a knowledge of certain inland and maritime countries. Whether a speech can be made to the people about passing or rejecting laws, or in the Senate on any kind of public transactions, without the greatest knowledge and judgment in political matters. Whether a speech can be adapted to excite or calm the thoughts and passions, which alone is a great business of the orator, without a most diligent examination of all those doctrines which are set forth in the nature and manners of men by the philosophers. I do not know whether I may not be less successful in maintaining what I am going to say, but I shall not hesitate to speak that which I think. Physics and mathematics and those other things which you have now decided to belong to other sciences belong to the peculiar knowledge of those who profess them. But if anyone who would illustrate those arts by eloquence, he must have recourse to the power of oratory. Nor, if, as is said, Philo, the famous architect who built an arsenal for the Athenians, gave that people an eloquent account of his work, is it to be imagined that his eloquence proceeded from the art of the architect, but from that of the orator? Or, if our friend Marcus Antonius had to speak for Hermodorus on the subject of dock building, he would have spoken, when he had learned the case from Hermodorus, with elegance and copiousness, drawn from an art quite unconnected with dock building. And Asclepiades, who we know as a physician and friend, did not, when he excelled others of his profession in eloquence, employ in his graceful elocution the art of physic, but that of oratory. What Socrates used to say, that all men are sufficiently eloquent in that which they understand, is very plausible, but not true. It would have been nearer truth to say that no man can be eloquent on a subject that he does not understand, and if he understands a subject ever so well, but is ignorant how to form and polish his speech, he cannot express himself eloquently even about what he does understand.